You are listening to and streaming A More Perfect Union on KBLA Talk 1580. I'm Dr. Nii-Quartelai Quartey, and it's not just any old day where you have a chance to speak to someone who has bear witness to history, not just history, but a history maker. I'm talking about The Voice. And if you enjoy a good book and a good story as much as I enjoy a good book and a good story, then mark your calendars for January 25th, because that's when you get an opportunity to get your hands on Protecting Whitney. And here with us today, David Roberts, the author of Protecting Whitney, who actually happens to have been Whitney Houston's bodyguard. He's the real bodyguard. Can you believe that? Welcome, David Roberts.
Thank you, Delcan. Welcome to you too. Thank you so much.
It's so nice to have you here, and just speaking with you moments before we went on air. On top of the storied adventures that you write about in your book Protecting Whitney, coming out on January 25th, as I mentioned, you kind of sound like James Bond a little bit. What's that about? Where are you from?
I'm actually from Wales, from a farming community in what they call the Llyn Peninsula, which is in North Wales. That's where I originate from. I spent much of my working life in London before coming over to the United States, but I've got such a Brooklyn accent now. I've only been here 30 years, so it's difficult to get rid of that Brooklyn accent.
Don't get rid of a thing. Don't get rid of a thing. And congratulations on your new book. I've just got to share with folks a little bit of the beginning of the book, because it grabs you from the very beginning. You write, after spending so many years in angry contemplation, I found it cathartic to finally recall, relive, and recount my experiences, my life as Whitney Houston's bodyguard. I'm hoping that by sharing this story, you can get to know her more deeply and appreciate what we lost from this world when she died. I started by answering the question I am often asked. Yes, I was Whitney Houston's bodyguard. No, I'm not Kevin Costner. He's taller. Was real life with her like it was in the movie? Is life ever like it is in the movies? And sometimes yes, and sometimes no. Did I love her? Yes, but perhaps not the way you were thinking. Show me someone who didn't. Did I ever take a bullet for her? Again, perhaps not the way you were thinking, but I've realized all these many years later that yes, I really did. That is just the beginning of the book. I found it hard to walk away from it. There's so much there. Tell us, why did you decide to write this book now? Why now, after Whitney Houston has been gone for so many years?
Well, there are a number of reasons. I appeared in a documentary film, Can I Be Me? As a result of that, I was approached by an established author who said, I'd like to write your story. And so I met with the author concerned, and we discussed it, and a sample was produced which I could not agree with. I didn't like the interpretation that was being placed on it. As a result of which, I decided to do it myself, the seed having been sown as such. And yes, it was cathartic. And at the end of the day, it displays much of what has been anger for a long time over everything that had taken place. And I suppose at the end of the day, it is as much I don't know, a panacea to me as it will be to, I can't imagine anybody, any lady in particular, not reading that book and identifying therein with something in their lives. I cannot imagine that.
Speaking of the anger, in the book, you write about an experience you had with Whitney's throat doctor at the Grand Canyon in March 1995. Speaking of the anger, you write, the anger in me began to rise. I thought of the magnificent, exquisite voice that could reach into one's heart and soul with its range and depth, now in danger of being lost forever. I was furious at all those who facilitated Whitney's ability to do this to herself. who looked the other way because they saw her voice box as a cash machine, as her protection officer. It was my responsibility to keep her safe at all costs. And yet the good doctor was asking me to address a threat I had not been trained to handle. A bomb of a sniper's bullet could be avoided, deferred, or mitigated with accurate situational assessment. But this significantly more insidious threat, the terrorist that lurks within, was the most daunting. And as shock and ire gave way to resignation and resolve to do what had to be done, I was curious about one thing in particular. Doc, why are you telling me this? Looking at me pointedly, he said, because you're the only one I can speak to with sufficient common sense to get something done. What an awesome responsibility he had just laid firmly on my shoulders. He was not speaking to her husband, her manager, her father, her mother, or anyone else who would normally be expected to look out for her voice or her career, just her bodyguard. Whoa. When I read that, I had to stand up and take a walk.
Yeah, unfortunately, I was in a plane when he said all that. I couldn't go anywhere. I was stuck. I was in a position that I had no alternative but to take it on. You can protect most people against most things. The one thing you can't protect them against is themselves. And that was actually what was confronting me at that time. And I couldn't get, as you read through the book, you see there was a limited amount of help available or indeed willing to be imparted. So it became a tragedy in and of itself, even at that time, despite the fact that it continued for quite some time after that.
So it's interesting. I mean, there have been so many stories shared about the life and legacy of Whitney Houston, where a number of family members, a number of people in her quote unquote inner circle, have sort of positioned themselves as being a part of interventions along the way or over the years. At this point in your journey with her, it seems that that wasn't your experience. Is that true?
Yes, intervention was out of the question, and the reason that was given was that to have done so would have destroyed her reputation and possibly her career. Notwithstanding that by that time, I think Aerosmith had come out with their individual drug problems. They'd gone into rehabilitation. They'd resolved their issues and were top of their rock and roll charts back again. So I didn't quite follow the logic of the argument until you personalize it and realize the people you're speaking to, they're going to pay their mortgages out of the voice box.
Wow. Wow. So I've got to ask you, how much of your story jives with the story of the Bodyguard? Inquiring minds want to know, is it like 50% your story? Is it 80% your story, or maybe just a little bit of your story? And who learned of your story well enough to make sure that the Bodyguard movie was more authentic than not to Whitney's experience?
The chronology is that 22 years prior to Mr. Costner getting the script, it was written with Steve McQueen and Diana Ross as the potential stars in that film. It then was purchased by Mr. Costner and developed accordingly. I think that in reality, the 2 hours and 10 minutes of that film, in major respects, encapsulated 6.5 years of our life together then. There are two major differences. One is the bullets are flying around. That did not happen. Neither did the love, sex, or everything else that goes in it. But you take those elements out of that film, and it becomes quite boring, really. But that was our life for 6.5 years prior to the release of that film. And I would always say, and it's more or less my personal opinion than anything else, Whitney actually wasn't acting. That was her. And where we had an issue when I saw it is that she selected the name that we used to house her in the hotels. So if you were to call the hotel and say, "Yeah, I'm Whitney's brother, put me through to her room," no. You'd have to say, "I'm Whitney's brother, put me through to speaker Rachel Marron."
Really?
So once,
Whoa.
so that's how real that element of the film was. Yes.
So it wasn't hard for her to think of herself as Rachel because that was basically, her pseudonym when she traveled.
That's right. That's what kept us safe.
Wow. So tell us, The Bodyguard was a blockbuster film. It
Yes.
took Whitney's career to the next level. Uh, the soundtrack to The Bodyguard was a chart popper, to say the least. Uh, did Whitney have any idea that this film was going to be as big of a hit globally as it became?
I don't know if I can answer that question. I suspect not, because it was just another day at the office for her at the level of fame that she was at in those days. It was, again, routine. It's a film. Okay, let's move on. What are we doing the next show? That sort of thing. You never stood still. The pressure on this young lady who wanted to do nothing other than be normal is unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
Was unbelievable. The success of this film raised that threshold beyond uh, easy support and compliance. And there was a lot of compliance necessary. Contracts were signed, songs had to be sung, people had to be spoken to, concerts had to be sung. And I think shortly after that, we started a tour that was scheduled to be 790 days long.
Wow.
We never completed that
Mm-hmm.
because you've seen the video to the song "I Will Always Love You," right?
Yes. Yes.
That video was captured in an old cinema in Hollywood. We
Mm-hmm.
were there for that purpose. Coming out of that recording, she took me by the arm. She said, "David, I'm pregnant." Yes. So even before this thing had come off all the processing that they do
Mm-hmm.
to make films, she was already with child and preparing to be a mother. So
Wow.
you throw on top of that the success,
Mm-hmm.
resounding success, probably unparalleled, if not unprecedented success of a single film like that, on top of becoming a new mother. And you've got a lot of pressure, right? How do you through that sustain any level of normality as an individual?
And maintain safety. When we come forward, I want to talk about the fans, or as you put it, the fanatics. In the book, you write, quote, "The word fan is the derivative of the Latin word fanaticus, meaning insanely but divinely inspired. From it, we get the word fanatic. And as I was coming to realize, there was a thin dividing line between harmless fans, which those guys tailing us claim to be, and fans who might be dangerous with intentions of carrying out some crazed obsession. If you let any fan, however, seemingly innocent, get through your guards, they could turn out to be a killer. The golden rules were never lose sight of your principle and never let anyone get close enough to touch her." When we come forward, I want to learn from you whether or not there are any crazy fans that you remember from your days protecting Whitney. You are listening to and streaming a More Perfect Union on KBLA Talk 1580. More with David Roberts, the author of Protecting Whitney. There are so many anecdotes, and if you're ever wondering what it might feel like to be a fly on the wall, traveling around the world with the voice, Whitney Houston, this book really delivers that experience. And I'm so glad that we have the author with us here today. David, I've got to ask you about the fans, right? In your book, you talk about how there's a thin line between fan and fanatic. We know in the movie The Bodyguard, there was a fan turned fanatic. Are there any fanatical fans that you remember from your days protecting Whitney Houston?
Oh yes, yes indeed. I think one in particular is identified in the book from Newark, New Jersey, and ultimately he threatened family members. He especially threatened Whitney. Many of the fans are obsessed with the fact that they were either a long lost sibling who'd been cast out by Mrs. Houston. They were already married. They were they were the ones responsible for Whitney's baby to come. And there's a lot of crazies out there. There was another chap who, in not only following us about the country as investigations transpired, was actually going thereafter to Mariah Carey's. She has a children's home, and he was there going to compromise her in the same manner. Fortunately, we had the police meet him when he thought he was meeting me, and that was the end of that. But there are many of them, and not just here in America. There's another one in Australia who was going to get up during the encore of Greatest Love of All and take Whitney from his seat, which he'd already bought and gave us the number, to meet his dead mother.
Oh, wow.
So that they could all be together for eternity.
Yikes.
And this is the guy who's sending socks and underwear soiled and so on and so forth. And he did. He turned up at the last show, and for the encore, he was there. He was surrounded by police officers in plain clothes. He had no idea they were there. And he was totally unemotive. He did not move. He did not make any expressions. He just sat there. All the fans were going crazy. He sat there. Even if he hadn't written and specified his intent, to see him in that manner in a crowd of excited people, totally impassive, that would have honed everybody's attention on him. That's dangerous.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Yikes. It sounds really dangerous and really scary. And it's just a little taste of so many stories that you feature in your new book, Protecting Whitney, which is available on January 25th. There are a cast of characters that have been in Whitney Houston's orbit for some time. And there are so many names, so many different names that are peppered throughout this book. One name that comes to mind is Robin Crawford. You talk about Robin as somebody who was very protective of Whitney, at times sort of making your job of protecting her more difficult, trying to keep you at bay. Talk to me about the nature of Whitney and Robin's relationship. Did it feel more like, being protected by a best friend, more being protected by a lover, maybe a little bit of both?
At the time, it was clearly a best friend. They were tight. The two of them were very tight together. They interacted with each other. They were with each other all the time. Robin resented Whitney getting close to anybody else, and she reflected the resentment, which you sit there, you stand there, there's a problem developing here. Robin is a beautiful, beautiful woman, strong woman. In fact, if she was security trained as such, she would be an Amazon. She was incredible. She did a lot of good for Whitney, and she did a lot of bad, but that's not exclusive to her. Not exclusive to her at all. Her love for Whitney, unimpeachable. Nobody could have loved Whitney as much as Robin loved Whitney. Nobody.
David,
in her own way, yes.
David, when you say, she did a lot of good for Whitney and a lot of bad for Whitney, are you alluding to what running errands for Whitney, which might have included facilitating the use of drugs. What are you alluding to?
Well, let me qualify that in as much as saying this, and I think I said it in the book at least once there. For the whole of the time that I was with Whitney Houston, I never once saw her imbibe a narcotic, unless you consider a bottle of Heineken and a cigarette a narcotic. That is all I ever saw her do. For the whole time I was with her, she never did anything like that in front of me. By her own admission thereafter, she was. The reason that I said that about the bad for Robin is that her attitude towards Whitney angered other people in that orbit, and she was perceived more as not an asset but a problem. Mm-hmm. And that reflected in our day-to-day living and everything else. It impacted Robin, it impacted Whitney, it impacted everybody in the environment. So Robin was I suppose a seed. And from that seed grew something that wasn't always good.
But how much of the upset and displeasure that folks had with Robin, how much of that was just sort of her attitude and just sort of the way that she moved and how protective she was of Whitney versus her identity? Were people feel some kind of way that Robin sort of presented maybe as a lesbian? I'm not sure if she identified at the time, but were folks uncomfortable with that being so close? Somebody being a lesbian, or at least lesbian presenting, being that close to Whitney?
You're talking about protective. The issue became possessive, not protective per se. Yes, she was protective of it, but she was very possessive of Whitney. Nobody could have access to Whitney without Robin, and then that was all controlled. Bear in mind, most of the people at that level in Whitney's working environment had no experience in what they were doing. They were her friends. They were her friends. They were her family. That was it. Nobody had the training. Very few people had the training. So the executives, some of them did, for sure. But she was surrounded by people who were ostensibly her friends or family in an environment that was forever escalating in terms of her fame. And it was tough for everyone. Many of them, as you see, couldn't handle it, either as individuals or on her behalf. And that was where the problem was.
Yeah. Before Bobby, because again, what period of time were you serving as her bodyguard?
From 1988 through to 1995.
Okay, so from 1980 to 88 to 1995. And so you were her bodyguard sort of before Bobby Brown and after she had married Bobby Brown, correct?
That's true, yes.
And so, talk to us about their relationship, because I think the public has a perception that, especially towards the end of their relationship, that it was a bit erratic and perhaps maybe even unhealthy. What did you observe in terms of their relationship?
We were sitting in, I think it's TGIF in Atlanta, Peachtree. And there was myself, Robin, Sylvia, and Whitney. And Sylvia and Robin went off some. She said, "David, I've got to tell you something." I said, "Go ahead." Bobby asked me to marry him. So, oh, right. It surprised me, but at the same token, it didn't. They were fanatically in love, without a shadow of a doubt. Nobody could say any different. The fact that Bobby had too much of it outside the sphere of just Whitney was another issue. But by the same token, she loved him, period. You know, in the book, the first time I met him, he got off a bus to go to her birthday party in 1989. before the evening was over, they were dancing, they were having fun, and I didn't see him for a long time after that, because at that time, of course, she was still with Eddie Murphy as a boyfriend.
Mm-hmm.
So it was sometime after that he came back on the scene.
Wow. So many great stories. I mean, again, if you're looking for that fly on the wall experience between the years of 1988 and 1995, being in the room with Whitney Houston, then you got to check out this book, Protecting Whitney. It comes out January 25th. More with David Roberts, the author of Protecting Whitney and also former bodyguard of Whitney Houston. When we come forward, this is a KBLA exclusive, and you're listening to A More Perfect Union right here on KBLA Talk 1580 in Drive Time.